where we are very pleased to launch Beyond Great, 9 strategies for thriving in an era of social tension, economic nationalism, and technological revolution. A book on business strategy by Dr. Arindam Bhattacharya, Managing Director and Senior Partner at Boston Consulting Group, and his 2 senior partners, colleagues Nicholas Lang and Jim Hemerling. Dr. Bhattacharya has been associated with CII for many years. He is a former member of the CII's National Council and has contributed extensively to CII's discussions and white papers on the Indian economy and manufacturing sector. He also writes extensively on these topics in business press. In Beyond Great, Dr. Bhattacharya and his colleagues make the bold claim, basis their multi-year research, that strategies that companies had adopted in the 20th century to deliver great performance are no longer effective in today's volatile and uncertain era. The authors make the case that while some of these strategies might still be relevant, companies have to go much beyond them and implement new approaches and business models, which they refer to as the new playbook, to build competitive advantage. As they put it, the 20th century definition of great is no longer good enough in the 21st. I'm very pleased to have Dr. Bhattacharya talk to us about his latest book and give us the author's perspective, describe his new strategic playbook. His presentation will be followed by a panel discussion on lessons for Indian companies and major implications for India's policymakers from these new business strategies and business models. May I now invite Dr. Bhattacharya to talk about his new book, Beyond Great. Dr. Bhattacharya, please.
Thank you, Renuka. I am absolutely delighted to be here and talk about my recently launched book, Beyond Great. As Renuka said, 9 strategies for thriving in an era of social tension, economic nationalism, and technological revolution, which I co-authored with 2 of my BCG colleagues. And this is the book. And I do hope that you get a chance to sometimes read it or read the ebook. But what I'd like to share with you over the next 12 to 15 minutes are some key insights and highlights from the book. And let me start this discussion with a quote from Mark Bitzer, the CEO of Whirlpool, the global leader in appliances. He has been a thought partner in my research journey over the years. And during one of the interviews where we were discussing the big questions facing business leaders, he made a very insightful comment. We live in torn times. And the way he explained it was business leaders today are faced with a very, very contradictory kind of choices. What I call torn choices. Choices, tough strategic questions, where to locate the plants given the uncertainty around border taxes, where to invest given the growth challenges and nationalistic policies of many countries. But at the same time, he also said that companies that excel at understanding the consumer behavior in today's digital era can create huge opportunities for themselves. So in some sense, Mark's comment, which is the contradictory comment, captures the core themes and questions which form the basis of the book Beyond Great. The book starts with briefly describing this torn world we live in today, a world of contradictions and many uncertainties, where business leaders are forced to question some of the basic beliefs that developed over the second half, particularly over the second half of the 20th century. It was a world with accelerating globalization, a world where multilateralism had established a more stable set of business rules between companies and between countries. And as the book title says, this world has been fundamentally disrupted by the 3 forces of social tension, economic nationalism, and technological revolution. And rules of business are being rewritten. And they are not just being rewritten, they are also becoming more and more uncertain. So this world, this new era being shaped by these three forces, forces actually force many business questions for leaders. They face new expectations from shareholders and different stakeholders. They have different rules as questions around where to set up the plants, which countries to grow. They face new risks from the increased volatility, but they also face enormous opportunities from the technological and consumer revolution that is underway. So how do companies build competitive advantage in this new era of globalization? This is the core question that we answer in the book. The first insight that I'd like to share with you from this multi-year research, which has covered hundreds of companies and we interviewed dozens of leaders, business leaders around the world, is there's no silver bullet. There's no one strategy that can help you answer this question. You have to rethink every aspect of your business model. The second insight was the strategies that developed and were perfected in the 20th century to deliver great performance is no longer good enough, as Renuka mentioned in her introduction. You have to go beyond. And what we meant is you have to build new layers of capabilities, new skills, new talent, new supply chains. And that is the title, that is the basis of the title, that you have to go beyond. You have to go beyond the great strategies of the 20th century. And in this book, and that's the core of the book, we present this new playbook of 9 strategies, each one of which is based on a paradigm shift. These 9 strategies are divided into 3 sections. First one dealing with growth, the second one dealing with operations, and the third deals with organization and cultural shift that companies have to make today. Now, I don't want to go through all the 9 strategies, but let me illustrate 4 of these paradigm shifts and strategies that are highly relevant for Indian companies, also for policymakers in India. The first strategy is in the first chapter, which I want to talk about, is the first chapter and aptly called Do Good, Grow Beyond. Now, if you think back to the late 20th century and want to ask a simple question, what would decide or describe a great organization? The answer would have been a company that delivers sustained great returns to shareholders. This reflects the central idea of a paper that was presented by the economist Milton Friedman in his famous article in New York Times in 1970, in which he said the sole objective of companies and their CEOs was to maximize profits for the shareholders. But in today's economically and socially fragmented world, to use the words of an interview that we did with a senior leader from Anglo American, the global mining company, companies have to go beyond. They need what she called the societal license to operate and grow. And this they do by delivering benefits, not just to shareholders, but to all stakeholders. And this is a huge paradigm shift taking place, where societal impact is not a lip service or a CSR activity at the periphery of the business. It becomes the core in which you design your business model. And let me make this real, because still now this is just a set of jargon. I don't know how many of you have heard of a company called Natura, the Brazilian cosmetics company, which has won in the marketplace with its customers, with its communities, with its government by putting sustainability and working with local communities at the core of their business model since they were started in 1960. They have launched green products. Their supply chain, they were the first companies to use reusable packages. They measured their carbon footprint, their brands, they positioned it around green. And remarkably, this was a company, this is a public company that in 2007 was carbon neutral. It was a time when most companies were not even talking about carbon neutrality, they were carbon neutral. It was the first public company to be given the B Corp award as the top socially conscious company in the world. They've invested billions of dollars in protecting the Amazon basin and the local communities who live off it. They've done this, but at the same time, they have been the best performing stock in the Brazil. They have created more shareholder returns than their global peers. And their success has enabled them to acquire companies and brands that you know much better, Body Shop and Avon. So they have won in this new era by putting doing good into the core of the business model, drive growth and profitability. And more companies are recognizing this. And if they have to kind of create advantage and win with the society, they have to change the way they think about the purpose of the business. Let me talk about another growth strategy that has, again, a huge implication for all companies and reflects a fundamental paradigm shift in how you think about your products, your customers, and your markets. Now, if you were to look at the best business books of the late 20th century and what we call classical grid strategy, the way to create competitive advantage was to design, produce, and sell highly differentiated products to customers. But today, the digitally connected, savvy customers want much more. They don't want to buy just a product. They want to buy a solution that delivers an outcome for them. They don't want any service. They want a superior personalized experience. And let me take an example of an industry that is the oldest industry in the world and actually one of the most complex manufacturing or production process, which is agriculture. This is a production process, and this is also reflected in some of the challenges that we have seen in facing in India. This is a production process that requires huge number of variables to be managed. The weather, the soil conditions, the quality of seeds and fertilizers, the depth at which you put in the rains, and so on and so forth. For the farmer, he doesn't want to buy a tractor. He wants someone to give him a solution to be able to manage these variables and create the highest profits from his acre of land. And who has done this the best? If you know John Deere, the world's largest farm equipment company, they realize that farmers today don't want to just buy a tractor. They want a solution that can help them maximize their profits. So what did they do? So they put sensors in all their tractors and equipment that the farmers use, which measures the quality and condition of the soil, gives the performance indicators of the machine in terms of fuel consumption and so on and so forth. They have taken data on crop prices, the weather, and all other kinds of public data. They have taken data from the farmers, which farmers can use themselves, but John Deere can't, but farmers can use themselves. But they created an algorithm which the farmers can use to calculate the profit from their farm. This is a digital solution that John Deere provides. They are not just selling tractors today. They claim that they're selling a digital solution to the farmer. And this business of John Deere is their fastest growing business. And as some of the panel members would also tell you that today, this digital solution business is actually for many industrial companies and many consumer companies is the fastest way they can engage growing business and the way they can engage with their customers. And those companies that can adopt this solutions, which integrates the data, the digital with the physical product or the physical service, they are creating enormous opportunities for themselves. They are winning the market, and those which are not doing it or which are lagging behind will actually find it difficult to compete. So this gives you a flavor for two very different strategies which differentiate what I'll call the 20th century playbook from the 21st century. Doing good, growing beyond, and not just producing and selling a product. You actually need to sell a solution that delivers an outcome to the customer. So let me now turn to another paradigm, and that paradigm has a huge implication for Indian companies and for Indians' economic policy. This is the paradigm of shift that is happening in supply chains. Now, in the second section of the book, We talk about their operations and how the global operating models are changing. If you look at the 1990s and 2000s, we saw the emergence of the low-cost driven global supply chains as a best practice. Large manufacturing companies actually shifted a lot of the capacities from the developed high-cost economies to the developing economies which had low-cost labor. In the 21st century, these supply chains are being impacted by three very radical trends: the rise of tariffs and barriers, as we saw with the growth of economic nationalism, the new digital companies and industrial technologies that are eroding the advantage of low-cost labor, and also customers who don't want to just buy a standard product. They want a more customized and personalized products which cannot be delivered from high-scale standard factories. They need factories which are highly flexible, which are highly responsive to the changing customer needs. Let me give you an example of a product and companies who are experimenting with these kind of new supply chain models. Now, if you look at companies like Adidas and Nike, I mean, all these companies shifted their entire shoemaking capacity from the Western high-cost markets to Asia. Countries like Vietnam and China and Indonesia and some India also export some of these shoes. But this was based on really low-cost labor and large-scale factory concept. So Adidas a couple of years ago kind of designed a completely new factory concept, which they call smart factory. Now these are very small, fully automated plants, only with robots and 3D printers for the main manufacturing. And then of course they had some human intervention in the packaging and dispatch. But these were not set up in China or Vietnam, where they source most of the shoes from. These pilot smart factories were set up in Germany and the US to produce the latest designs, which even the customer could design and send the new design to them and could produce them quickly and get them into the retail outlets at speed. Latest designs, highly responsive plants. A very, very different manufacturing concept, which is differentiated from the low-cost, large-scale plants which had come up in the 1990s and 2000. And these highly automated, highly flexible plants, along with low-cost plants, will exist together in what we call emerging multi-country supply chains. And this is going to be the 21st century supply chain model that emerges, that integrates technology with low-cost labor in very, very dynamic networks of manufacturing plants and delivery centers. And we can see the first one of these kind of networks emerging in the ITS, in the Indian IT services networks, who are setting up these kind of networks which are extremely flexible, extremely responsive, extremely resilient to kind of volatility that we see in today's world. And again, companies which will build these kind of 21st century manufacturing and delivery networks will create advantage in their operations compared to just having large scale inflexible plants. The last paradigm shift that again I will talk about, that again can create a huge advantage and huge opportunity, is around talent. And this is what we actually covered in the last part of the book. We look at organization, we look at people management and talent management, and we look at culture. And this is where again companies are facing a fundamental challenge: how to attract, motivate, and retain talent in today's digital era, where the future work is what we call bionic, that is done by a combination of both human and machine. This calls for a fundamentally new set of skills around digital, and also these skills are very fast evolving as new technologies evolve. At the same time, the young generation today, they have very different expectations from the work they do. They have very different aspirations. Just going up the corporate ladder doesn't excite them. They also want to gain new and different experiences. They want to manage their work life differently. And they don't often want to constrain themselves through having a very kind of rigid and structured career. They often want to work freelance. So in this book, we describe some of the practices by leading companies, both in India. Indian IT companies are fundamentally transforming how they manage talent. Some of the global companies, the Unilever, which we bring out in the book, how they are rethinking their entire talent management strategies. And this was brought to me live by one of the interviews I had with a leader of a global technology company in the US, when she asked me, do you know where we have hired the best digital strategy people? Not from the top campuses. We have hired them from those who have been the finalists in online gaming. And I was completely taken aback. I said, why? She said, online gaming is one of the most complex business problems. It is dynamic, it is multi-level, it is multivariate. And so consequently, those people who are able to handle this complex gaming environment should be able to excel in developing strategies in today's complex digital environment. But the challenge has been, how do you hire them? They don't want to work in kind of 9-to-5 jobs in a career. They want a completely different environment. And she said, we have to find a way to create an environment to be able to attract these people. They want to come in after noon. They want to work till 12 o'clock. They don't have a dress code. They work in completely different kind of team structures. Can we create a culture which can attract them, which can inspire them, but they can create huge opportunities for us by thinking, just kind of breaking out of the box in their thoughts. So that is today's talent strategy, and the combination of new expectations of the young generations along with the digital skills really underscores the paradigm shift taking place in the organization talent model. So let me just end this with one last kind of comment. In the book, we present these 9 strategies through 50 such stories. I told a couple of these stories in the 15 minutes or so today. These stories cuts across countries, cut across geographies, cuts across industries. From India, we cover the remarkable stories of TCS. It's become the most valuable IT company, Bajaj Auto, the most valuable auto company, but also the lessons that we have learned from the global forays of Tata Steel and the way the Indian IT companies, and we tell the story of Wipro, they are changing the way they deal with talent in the fast changing world. Together, these strategies presented in Beyond Great paint a picture of what it will take to build a competitive advantage in the 21st century, in a new era, in a new world being shaped by social tension, economic nationalism, and technological revolution. I do hope you're excited by the book and some of the stories that I've told. And right now, I think it is a great opportunity for us to hear from some of the people who have featured in the book and their stories of some of the strategies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bhattacharya. And ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Amitabh Kant has joined, and we will now begin with the panel discussion. But before we start with that, I'd like to introduce the panelists to you. Our first panelist, Mr. Amitabh Kant. Mr. Kant has been a friend, philosopher, and guide to CII throughout the years. Whether it was the Ministry of Tourism or in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Kant has been a go-to person for CII. He has been instrumental in the rollout of several important national campaigns, such as Startup India, Make in India, and Ease of Doing Business initiatives during his stint as Secretary IPP in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. As a CEO of Niti Aayog, CII has had the privilege of working with him on several issues. Most recently being, he played a key role in helping ease the constraints being faced by Indian industry during the lockdown imposed due to the COVID-19 outbreak. Our next speaker today is Mr. Sunil Mathur. Mr. Mathur is the Managing Director and Chief Executive of Siemens Limited. CII is proud to share that Mr. Mathur has been elected as the CII Western Region Chairman for the year 2021. He's responsible for Siemens in South Asia, represented mainly by Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan, as also Siemens Group companies in India. He's currently a member of the global leadership of Siemens. He's on the board of the Indo-German Chamber of Commerce and the Bombay Chamber of Commerce. We have with us also Ms. Rama Bijapurkar, who is a recognized thought leader on market strategy and consumer behavior. She is also co-founder of think tank and fact tank, People Research on India's Consumer Economy, and a very experienced independent director who has seen the insides of several blue chip boardrooms. A professor of management practice at the IIM Ahmedabad, Ms. Bijapurkar is a dominant voice in the media on issues related to her areas of work and is also the author of well-acclaimed books on consumer India. We also have with us Mr. Rakesh Sharma, who is the Executive Director, Bajaj Auto. He's a business leader and member of the board of Bajaj Auto Limited. An alumni of IIM Ahmedabad, Mr. Sharma's specialities include business leadership in India and overseas, particularly in emerging markets. Mr. Rakesh Sharma is the president of the Geneva-based International Motorcycle Manufacturers Association, which represents the manufacturing industry of powered two-wheelers at the global level. You have already heard the author, Dr. Arindam Bhattacharya, who's a senior partner at Boston Consulting Group's New Delhi office. He's been the head of BCG, is the co-founder and fellow of the BCG Henderson Institute, BCG's thought leadership arm, and is a member of the leadership team of the firm's Global Advantage practice. He has been researching, writing, and consulting on the subject of globalization and global business models and has given a TED talk on the topic. He has co-authored the book Globality, Competing with Everyone from Everywhere for Everything, named by The Economist in its Best of the Year list. And finally, we have the moderator for this discussion, Ms. Ruchi Bhatia, who has a decade of experience in business journalism. She has been leading economic policy and finance coverage of ET Now and has broken some of the biggest stories in the banking and financial world. Ruchi is the Deputy Chief of Bureau for New Delhi and also anchors primetime news on ET Now's leading show, India Tonight. Like I said, she is a moderator for the panel discussion on Beyond Great. And with her moderating the session and the presence of such eminent panelists, this definitely promises to be an engaging session with a lot of new insights. With this, I invite Ruchi to take over and take the discussion forward. Over to you, Ruchi. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Renuka. Ladies and gentlemen, appreciate you all joining in today. Of course, a very eminent panel with us today, Mr. Kant, Ms. Rama Bijapurkar, Mr. Sharma, as well as Mr. Mathur, and the author of the book Beyond Great, Arindam Bhattacharya, as well. Well, the book Beyond Great is a book that couldn't have really come in at a better time. We in India, across the world, have seen companies chasing growth in a world that up until now seemed stable and experiencing a secular growth. However, since the financial crisis, these companies had to readjust in a new era in which they had to shape growth amidst an uneven shifting growth rates in various countries. And if that wasn't enough, then COVID-19 really brought the future forward, forcing companies to rethink, reimagine, and readjust. And as Renuka, as well as Mr. Bhattacharya, were earlier pointing, the 20th century definition of great in terms of growth strategies, operating models is not enough. Companies now must go beyond and look at what is needed. Delivering great performances is not enough during these times. They must offer customized solutions. Maintaining cost-efficient networks across delivery centers is not enough. Companies must ensure that their networks are flexible enough to weather any sudden disruption. So we will be, of course, discussing all these issues in detail. In fact, the first area where I want to focus in on during this discussion is, of course, the era of new globalization and the issue of emerging that are emerging from economic nationalism and heightened geopolitical conflicts as well. Mr. Mathur, let me first begin by asking you, with this heightened economic nationalism, how are firms like Siemens driving a global a common global business model across countries and ensure a cost optimized supply chain as well?
Thank you very much, Ruchi, and it's really a pleasure to be part of this panel here. I think you raised an important question. With the heightened or the changes that are happening globally, a couple of issues have become very, very critical. The first is supply chains have got to be flexible. We've got to start being able to adapt to different situations in different parts of the world. The second is quality is a given. Even though you are adapting, you cannot compromise on quality. The third is you have to be cost competitive. And the question really is, in this kind of an environment, how can you bring all that together? How do you bring flexibility to meet the needs of the marketplace, but also to be able to adapt to global economic environment changes that will happen more increasingly? Customer behavior is also changing. They're becoming much more discerning, and global supply chains have got to adapt to those as well. How do you create in your manufacturing lines a batch size of one? In other words, how can you really prepare or produce products specific, tailor-made for a customer across the globe? And put that all together, the real thing that can answer most of that is Industry 4.0, digitalization, call it what you want. These are examples of where companies can switch from one area to another area, geographical, but also into change their requirements to meet the changing requirements of customers, can adapt to the quality needs, can bring in fresh adaptations to products. So flexibility is really now becoming a critical factor, and digitalization or Industry 4.0 can address all these needs. And that is what most companies around the world are going for.
Right, absolutely. In fact, let me hear it from the companies first, and then I will be taking it with Mr. Kant as well. Mr. Sharma, how are Indian firms who are looking at global operations or aspiring to build one are impacted by these developments? We're in an era where, there's more protectionism. We're talking about trade wars. What has been your experience? You have a sizable global footprint. What has been your experience? Talk to us about some of the challenges that you faced while you were looking to move into other countries, and how did Bajaj Auto as a company overcame these challenges?
Thank you, Ruchi, and hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me on the panel. You are right, Ruchi. We are almost 50% of our revenue comes from many overseas markets. Despite the tumultuous period of last few years, I still maintain that globalization is irreversible. Only the nature of the beast has changed. Obviously we are dealing with economic nationalism, if you want to call it that, or protectionism, duties. But these are, the sooner a global aspirant accepts these as the new rules of the game, then one can come out with innovative strategies of meeting the challenge. Because every government wants to generate employment. Every government wants to protect their consumers. People have fragile foreign exchange situations. You have to understand that. But I really don't think that any government, I mean, most of the countries we operate in are, any government wants to shut itself off from the world. It's just the terms of engagement have changed. Let me illustrate the point. Few years ago, and that's just about 6, 7 years ago, we had a very clear policy that we will not localize globally, because whenever you localize, let's say you're exporting a motorcycle and you want to globalize a component there, you're obviously exporting some part of your profit also over there. You have to sacrifice it. And we had a leadership position, let's say in Colombia, which wanted to increase the local value add component. We thought through this whole age-old policy of ours and decided that the times are such, and this is 4 or 5 years ago, the times are such that we'll have to bend with the wind. And we said, fine, we talked to our local vendors who struck alliances with local vendors there. We manufacture headlamps over there. We agreed with our partners over there that we will not transfer the entire profit because it's designed by us. There will be a share in the margin. And the business over there is booming for us. The three-wheeler, which the whole industry was created by us in Egypt, which is a huge market for us. It was, a holy cow that we will never ever manufacture a three-wheeler outside because we want to keep it inside. Today, 30% of a three-wheeler is made in Egypt, and we have, because of that, extended the longevity of the product cycle. And it has satisfied the government. And despite that, there'll be pockets here and there. So I believe that we have to demonstrate flexibility and adaptability both. They're both different terms. And globalization is still available. We are very, very optimistic about the expanding nature of our international side of the business. We are saying that why should we not control 50% of the world, in spite, because of government support. But yes, you're right. I mean, we have to do it in a very different way.
If I can come in, one of the interesting things that both Sunil and Rakesh referred to, and which is going to be important, kind of interesting to see what Amitabh Kant kind of comments on, is the nature of local versus global is fundamentally changing. Earlier, everything used to be headquarter driven, and all the business models and products and everything was supplied to headquarters, and the countries were outputs. That is gone. Today, the countries have to be independent. They have to have a very strong local presence and be able to leverage global scale. And that is the fundamental shift that has happened. You have to be local, but you also need global scale.
So let me
today. Yes.
Right, absolutely, Arindam. We have Mr. Kant with us, so let's pose this question to him. Mr. Kant, how do we strike a right balance for companies in terms of local and global? I mean, in the past, we've seen a lot of growth for companies being driven because of global trade, but now companies are having to readjust their strategies, all thanks to economic nationalism, countries becoming more protectionist. So how do companies, and especially Indian companies, strike the right balance?
First of all, I would say that all Indian companies must think globally. It's very, very important that all companies must become domestically competitive, but by becoming competitive, they'll become globally competitive, and without penetrating global markets, it will not be possible to grow and expand. It's also important to understand that India's share in global exports is less than 2%, and it's not possible for India, if its ambition is to grow at high rates of 9 to 10% per annum, to grow without being a major exporting nation. But this requires a huge amount of competitiveness. And therefore, this whole talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat is not about protectionism. It's about making India an integral part of global supply chains. Whether you call them physical supply chain or you call them digital supply chain, and a lot of convergence between physical and digital will take place in due course. But it's important that we become a major exporting nation and companies start looking globally. And that's the way it has worked post World War II for Japan, for Korea, for China, and for India. It's all the more important that we do this. We may have a vast domestic market. Our usage of vehicles may be very low per thousand as compared to US and as compared to Europe. But it's important that in all these areas of growth, it's important to get into major global markets. So I'm a great believer, and I think that's what the book says, that you have to be cost competitive domestically to be able to export, and you must be globally competitive to penetrate global markets. That's the key for all Indian companies. You can't survive by producing shoddy products at in competitive costs. That's not feasible. You must be globally competitive and you must be hungry for penetrating markets abroad.
Oh, absolutely. Mr. Kant, before I go to the other panelists, I have a follow-up question for you. In terms of, you were talking about that the need of the hour is to be globally competitive. In terms of policy support, a lot has been done by the government in the last few years. We have a lot of companies here also that have a wide presence globally. What kind of policy support can one envisage from the government during these times to ensure that they're competitive not only here in India, but when they go outside globally as well?
So firstly, I would say that, the government has brought in some very major reforms in terms of labor reforms. We've seen a huge amount of reforms in terms of coal, mining, agriculture sector, a huge amount of movement forward in terms of finding digital solutions and services, which will greatly enhance the productivity of Indian companies. And actually, one of the key things is really that what this book talks about is this huge convergence between physical and digital. And there's no country in the world which is better placed today to converge this, make this huge integration between digital and physical, and bring in efficiencies as well as greater consumer value. And therefore, while we'll continue to attract investments from global and become an integral part of global supply chains, because if you look at the production linked incentive scheme, which is for about close to 26 billion US dollars, and the way we've structured the scheme is that actually in 5 years time we should be able to get about close to $520 billion worth of production in this country. But and this is not merely for the domestic market, this is basically so that you are able to export. And the important thing is that if you want to participate in the global supply chain, you have to increasingly become digital. The consumer is looking for physical goods with a lot of digital value. And therefore, what this book talks about is new digital value chains.
Right.
Increasingly, physical products are giving you digital values. I mean, each one of the services, it's very difficult to differentiate between whether Tesla is a physical product or a digital product, because it's giving a huge amount of digital value to the consumer. And secondly, to my mind, it's very, very important that we are going to throw up a massive amount, as a country, we are going to throw up a massive amount of data. So if you look at it, the volume of data created worldwide is doubling every 3 years since 2011. Will be close to about 175 trillion gigabytes by about 2025. One of the great advantages of India is that our data costs are amongst the lowest in the world. And therefore, we have this massive opportunity of using artificial intelligence to leapfrog, do a lot of machine learning, and basically use technology, become cost efficient, digital infrastructure, and leapfrog. And this is a massive, massive opportunity for India. But this would require India to really focus, and our IITs and IIMs to focus on producing data scientists and analysts and artificial intelligence and machine learning programmers. There's a huge dearth of that. And I can tell you this, there's a huge shortage of good designers as well. So unless and until we are able to, these are the new huge value jobs in the coming years. And this is what we need. There's a huge focus on this. And the third point I want to make is, which is very, very important, is that all of us, particularly the governments, state governments, need to move away from what we've been doing over the centuries, that is doing physical and financial management. It's not about spending your total resources. It's about what is the output and outcome you are giving. So the outcome base is very, very important. And this would require us to move away from the traditional bureaucracy of working in hierarchies, breaking it and making ourselves extremely, extremely focused, outcome driven, and becoming highly agile. And therefore, my view is that governments, particularly state governments, will have to become more agile than the private sector of India. Once the government becomes very, very agile, it will drive, and that means that you'll have to break the highly structured and traditional government bureaucracy and really drive growth and progress in India. So I read this book and I was very, very fascinated by this book. It gives you a tremendous amount of food for thought for both. It definitely gives it for private sector, but it gives a lot of thought for government leaders, because it tells you how to really look at policies and governance models of tomorrow.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I will be focusing on, what does the government as well as private sector need to do in this digital era as well. But Ms. Bijapurkar, if I can come to you, how do you build a strategy based on local partnerships and investments while focusing on consumers as well? Because at the end of the day, they are the ones who will be receiving the end product. You're on mute.
There we go again. I was trying to keep the household sounds away. Thank you, Ruchi. What I found really fascinating about this book is two things. One, that hallelujah, at last we're moving to more customer-centered business talk as compared to supply-centered business talk. And the other was that we in this country have an opportunity to leapfrog if we've missed the one-size-fits-all, big, massive scale globalization boom. I think it's moving to places where we can do much better. I don't see an either or that is intrinsically embedded in the question. I think the dharma of business is to add value to customers and to extract value from them. And ecosystems, aggregation and sharing, as we have seen, actually drive down costs. Until the aggregation and sharing economy, which is data-driven, came to India, I think you could not, as as a consumer, you couldn't buy 1/10 of a car, you couldn't buy 1/15 of a black dress, or whatever else it is, or 1/15 of a piece of the cloud. And we've actually seen prices coming down. We've actually seen customer centricity going up, and I think that's what this book advocates. So if the mantra of this book does go forward, I think we will also see a lot more FDI coming in, because so far multinationals have not made much progress in this country. The one size fits all, what is the market for what I already have elsewhere, is not working. I think what this book is really saying is that granular globalization is what you need to do. There's a message for us as well. When I sit on boards, I'm really relieved because I don't have to now say, are you going to opportunistically buy? Are you going to go out there and place big bets? But I can ask, what is the granular global logic? Similarly, companies coming in will be more customer focused if they pick us for their granular globalization logic. So all in all, I see it as good for the consumer, good for business. And I'm really very excited to see where this discourse will go.
In fact, while we're talking about granular globalization, Mr. Mathur, if I can come to you, how do you, while we're building a global scale, a large country footprint is not enough and will not protect you from economic downturns, then how do businesses carefully assemble a portfolio of countries that will help them achieve profitable growth at scale and yield greatest risk-adjusted growth overall as well?
I think that's a huge question, Ruchi. The critical factor, as you mentioned, is actually ROIs. Companies are governed by the ROI at the first stage, and everything plays into that ROI. The cost of doing business, the cost of production, the cost of logistics, etc., all plays into that ROI concept. But let me just come back to this issue about flexibility, and this is going to become, it's local. It goes back to the point that Mr. Kant was talking about. If we've got to become a part of a global network of companies, we're going to have to first get our act right here locally. And this is true for large companies as well. We've got 23 factories here in the country, and our constant challenge is how do we stay competitive with other parent company factories in other parts of the world. So when there are products that have to be delivered to different parts of the world, my biggest competition is with my own company factory in another part of the world. Can I produce at a cost much lower, deliver at a quality much higher, and provide a value add which is much greater than any of my own companies in other parts of the world? Now, if you look at that and flip that on to what does this actually mean for Indian manufacturing, and particularly for small and medium enterprises, because that's really the core of the production here. Now, we all are aware that the government has a stated aim of increasing manufacturing share to GDP from 15% to 25%. Now, that means we're talking about a capex of around $1.2 to $1.3 trillion coming in if we've got to meet that aspiration. Now, there aren't too many countries around the world that are doing 1.2 or planning to do 1.2 or 1.3 trillion of capex. So you'll get all the international companies coming in to India now wanting to deliver. Now, most companies internationally have got competitive levels, productivity levels, quality levels of 98, 99%. We have a factory in Germany that has a productivity and a quality level of 99.999%. Now, you can't compare that with factories over here that are running at an average productivity level of 70 to 75% in the country. So you're going to need, and you're not going to be able to cover this gap of 30% with skilled labor. You're going to need digitalization. You're going to need Industry 4.0. But what does this mean for the small and medium enterprise in order to make him really competitive globally? We have a factory in Mumbai where we produce contactors. We used to make 77 variants of these contactors on 3 production lines. We used to have, and at that point in time, the market needed more. Our competition needed more. And there was never a business case for an additional production line because the volumes were just not there. Long story short, when you move to digitalization, we've gone from producing 77 variants on 3 production lines to 180 variants on 1 production line. We've gone from a cycle time of 21 seconds on 3 lines to 9 seconds on 1 line. We've gone from 22 quality checks to 68 quality checks. Now, if you look at that and translate this impact for a small and medium enterprise that struggles to be competitive because of access to working capital or lack of it, quality issues and so on, this is really what Mr. Kant is talking about. We've got to be competitive here
Right.
first before we can start accessing the global world. And that is what companies like ours are actually working on.
So let's hear it from Mr. Sharma as well. You know, Bajaj has doubled down on the asset light, model, leveraged digital technologies as well as platforms to better support their local partners and build a stronger customer relationships as well. How did Bajaj go about, in terms of doing this, and how did you leverage your digital technologies? What exactly is it that you would tell all the people who are listening into this conversation in terms of what has to be done?
Ruchi, my take on global versus local is that it's a debate which has been there forever. The local is driven by customers. Customers would like more colors, more sizes, different products. They want more and more choice, and that improves your ability to increase revenue. Companies drive globalization for their own needs because they can manage costs, they can manage quality, and they can simplify if the scale is high. So global is a company-driven phenomenon, according to me. The customer is not asking for global products as long as their quality and taste requirements are met, and the genius is in striking the balance. We, in our early stages of growth, we were constantly faced by this question that should we be making 15 different models for 15 different countries because that's the customers have different nuances, or should we make one model? And I think the answer is illuminated if by two things at the end of it all. Fundamentally, two things. One is a very, very deep understanding of what the customer values, what the consumer is valuing. Does the consumer really value those blinking lights and that, remote start of a motorcycle or that streak of green in Bangladesh? No, I mean, is it really valuable or is it novelty? Should we be compromising our quality for that? So a deep understanding of the customer and the value drivers occurring at that end. And the second thing which we set about, and there would be a lot of debates on this, is that where does our core competitiveness arise from? Where does it spring from? Is it by supplying the whole motorcycle, or should we just focus on the engine? Should we just, make the design? Should we just complete? So you have, and that you cannot answer that question if you do not understand competition as to how we are differentiated from competition. So once you start to realize that this is my core and come what may, I will protect it and make it better. And if globalization makes it better, giving it scale makes it better, so be it. So I feel unraveling these two questions very through deep introspection within the company helps you to analyze, helps you to arrive at a balance between the two forces. And that balance has to be struck depending on the context and depending on the situation.
Ms. Bijapurkar, while that point is being made by Mr. Sharma, I remember when I was reading the book, and the book was quoting one of the executives of General Motors, and they said that we can't be all things to all people at all time in all places. I want to understand from you, then, when you can't be present everywhere, when you can't do everything, then how do you decide that what your customer really wants? And a lot of it is, of course, driven by what the customer needs at the end of the day.
If I understand your question right, I think every business has got to have a market game. The idea that your back end will suddenly create a market game doesn't make sense. I think what Rakesh has just described very wonderfully is this choices of where to play and how to play. So you're playing cricket, or you're playing kabaddi, or you're playing a game of your own imagination.
Yeah.
And wherever it is, how are you going to play to win? I think we just haven't seen enough of attention being played to the market game. And I think this book is also saying, when you go global, for God's sake, your competitive advantage comes from a smart market game. And I think the trapeze act here, which again Rakesh has described, is how do you minimize cost to us and maximize perceived benefit to the consumer, not the green stripe we think we're adding, but the perceived benefit. So I think this book is making a case again for granular globalization. Have a market game when you go global. Know why you're there. Know what game you're playing. Know what gives you the authority to win. And please understand what winning actually means. I mean, don't go in there looking at the overall GDP and spreadsheet calisthenics. Say, I'm taking a little part of a little market and the combination of all these. In fact, my question would really be, how do you then manage the complexity of this? Because you're going from a simple, either you're the road roller or the road juggernaut, big size, to a bunch of multi-local plays. And that adds to your cost of complexity, and yet you've got to drive the costs down. But I think this has been waiting to come because the alternate route hasn't really served us, right? If you look at Indian business and its globalization, barring present company and a few others, we've had a lot of debacles along the way.
And if I can come in and add, one of the most interesting problems that was posed to me, not for just the book, but the consulting problem, was when the CEO of a global company asked us one question: why should we be global? And this was a company that had been global for 120 years. And one of the questions that he said was two things that came out. One is the advantage of being global, which was very much a physical scale advantage in a physical world, is getting eroded in a digital world. And if you look at some of the digital companies, I mean, they are global from day one, even if they are a startup. So there is a whole spectrum in which you can be competitive today as a physical versus physical digital company. And the second thing that came up very interestingly was the profit in a market is now no longer a direct correlation with your global scale. It is a correlation of your, what Rama said, the winning position in the market. And so therefore, it is a completely change in the way paradigm. And what I found it fascinating that in a consumer-facing company, which is unlike Siemens, which is what Rakesh, how do you create an ownership of the customer? And then we can figure out the back end. But my first thing is to create an advantage in that market by creating an ownership of the customer, by the deepest understanding of the customer better than my competitors. And if I can do that, I can figure out my back end to be able to supply that today in a digital world far more effectively than putting in huge investments in this market. And that's a very different kind of a game that companies, and Indian companies, as Amitabh was saying, because there is inherent value today of technology and data in this business model, we have an opportunity of creating or leapfrogging a position which we lost in the last quarter of the 20th century.
Right. And while we're talking about, the digital era, Mr. Kant, you made that point. How does that states have to be more responsive, not just the private sector, but states have to now look at how to leverage data, how to, work better in this digital era. How do states need to rethink talent in this digital era? I want to understand from you, in your, discussions with states, in your interactions with states, what are you telling them?
So one is that, we work very closely with the states in the spirit of cooperative and competitive federalism. And actually, we rank states across a number of indices. We rank states on innovation. We rank states on learning outcomes. We rank states on ease of doing business. We rank states on health outcomes. We've just finished work around ranking district hospitals. And we put this out in public domain so that we are able to, our objective is that we should put this, we should be able to name and shame state governments. And this is critical because people should know how the governments are performing. And we've seen a huge impact of this because we also work on the aspirational districts where we do real-time data. And we are constantly ranking districts, and we've seen massive improvements on outcomes in these districts simply because collectors are aware that their ranking is going to come out on a monthly basis, and we award good performing districts, and we, and therefore district collectors are able to utilize those resources to transform their districts. So key things which emerge according to me is, one is that real-time data to measure performance is very important. Secondly, constant innovation is key. And without constant innovation, you cannot do transformation. And thirdly, my belief is that India is in a unique position simply because it's done the jam trinity already. It's got, if you have over about 600 million smartphones, and if your data costs are so low, and if your UPI Unified Payment Interface in 4 years is got more value than Amex, and in the next 3 years will have more value than Visa and MasterCard, that means that you've got your digital framework right. And this is what needs to be driven, because you're the only country where about 98% of the people are paying direct tax online. Your GST is totally paperless and cashless. And you have a new Ayushman Bharat scheme. The health insurance component of it is cash. It's the biggest insurance scheme in the world, 500 million Indians, but totally cashless, paperless. So this digital transformation is actually should enable us to provide services to our common citizens at a much lower cost than anyone anywhere else. And on top of that, you should be able to use a lot of machine learning and AI. But I think the important thing for the country is that the private sector must be able to converge physical to the digital. And what this book talks about is the servitization of the physical products. And therefore, if you need to penetrate global supply chain, that really holds the key. And it's these lessons of servitization, or the lessons of innovation, or the lessons of agility, or the lessons of being a part of digital value chain, or the lessons of constantly focusing on outcomes are lessons which emerge from this book. And also the lessons of transformation leadership are equally important for the government as they are for the private sector of the country.
Oh, absolutely right. Mr. Mathur, if I can come to you, the point that Mr. Kant was making, that at this point of time, we need to, look at things in a very different manner, even for the private sector. I want to understand from you, while we're talking about digital solutions, digital platforms, how will you look to upskill, reskill your workforce as well? Because workforce is going to be an important and a crucial factor that will help in ensuring that even private sector is able to transition into this digital era with a lot more ease.
Absolutely, this is a very, very critical issue. The entire issue of upskilling, cross-skilling, and reskilling is indeed a huge issue. I think what we have started doing is rolling out programs for every single employee in the company globally to understand really what is the meaning of digitalization. Now, we were classically known to be an electrical company. Then we graduated to an automation company, and now we are moving towards digitalization company. And the real challenge is you've got a workforce that is used to being an electrical and automation driven workforce, and now you're taking them on to a different level, which is moving away from physical into the cloud, more or less. Now, this requires a completely different mindset. It requires a mindset not only technically, but also to be able to explain and to adapt to a completely different ecosystem. The classical way of working for a hardware company has been you get a tender spec and you deliver to a tender spec. Now you're having to start developing an ecosystem where you're having a conversation with the customer around what is it that is really your biggest issue, and can we co-create a solution together. Now, this requires a completely different mindset. And indeed a completely different culture. and you start moving then from having these large centralized driven or centrally driven organizations to becoming much smaller, much more decentralized, much more agile teams of people having to start working from the customer's pain point backwards. Now, this does require a whole amount of reskilling, not only in technical terms, in terms of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and that sort of stuff, but also really in terms of, now, what is the real value I can provide to a cement company? And rather than saying I can deliver a motor to a cement company, the biggest issue, for example, that some cement companies have is that the cost of a bag of cement is lower than the cost of a kilo of old newspapers. Now, any advantage that you can give is going to be huge for them. Now, if you can save energy costs, which is 40% of the cost of cement, manufacturing of cement, if you can bring a 10% saving over there, that's really making them hugely competitive. So you've got to start having these kind of conversations with customers to see what is it that will really help the customer to become much more competitive. And this is where you need really global learnings integrated and then adapted to local solutions.
Mr. Mathur, while you're making that point, let me take it across to Rama as well. Rama, the future of sales and marketing is now bespoke everything. We spoke about how customers have become more discerning. They really know what they want. So at a time like this, how should companies look to reskill their workforce, get their workforce ready also to work better in this digital era? You're on mute.
Gosh, I said to begin with, it would help if Indian companies could culturally have a little more respect for the customer. We don't often hear if you look at any strategy document, by the time the word customer comes in, it's page 312, if that. So I think to begin with, culturally, to get far more, drive home the fact that your customer is who's paying your salary or your revenue line depends on customers. I think once we get that cultural battle done, of course there is a skilling battle as well, and people who run businesses are far better equipped to do that than drama critics like board members. But I think that India Inc. has managed extremely well to put a digital heart inside its business because it crashed costs. And so we have used everything. So if you're a bank, you actually know how to get your KYC done remotely. Everything is absolutely perfect. The ease with which everybody went work from home and what happened during the lockdown, I think tells us that. I think the work that's left to be done is to actually take the whole digital thing to all customer-facing functions. So if you are servicing a genset and remote rural, then the ability to be able to remotely figure out what is wrong with it, which requires a lot of changes as well as reskilling that one person there. I think that distance still has to be done. And even all of us who talk about, data analysts, I don't know that we're hiring data architects as much as we're hiring data analysts. So there's some distance to go on the front end. The digital heart everywhere else is happily in there. Prices are crashed, but the customer is ready to go digital. Indian customers love digital. It gives you status blind service, and our temples have gone digital. So what's to think?
Absolutely. Rakesh, if I can come to you, while we're rethinking talent in the digital era, what are some of the key lessons that, you can share with us in terms of how Bajaj Auto has reskilled and given new skills to their own workers as well?
I think Rama's habit is catching on. Anyway, for us, the availability of digital technologies has been a real savior. we are a very small company. For a company to be having global aspirations, $4 billion is nothing. Our Japanese competitors 10 times our size. And uh, and we couldn't have done it if we had not banked on some of these digital opportunities, so to say. How do you make the salesperson in a dealership in Santiago, Chile, believe that he's working for Bajaj Auto? That's through digital. Today, if there is a bluish exhaust experienced in a three-wheeler in Abuja, within 6 hours, our CTO gets that information. We have platforms of opinion makers when we launch our latest sports bike. I mean, 10 years ago, this wouldn't have been possible. But last 4-5 years, it has emboldened us and helped us, grow the business. And there is a plethora of these things. But the thing which really worries me, and which is a preoccupation with me, is this is all inside out. This is all simplifying our life. This is all trying. And of course, there are a few things out there which are very helpful, because even a Brazilian customer today knows about Bajaj Auto without us having stepped in Brazil ever before. So all those things are helpful. But the thing which really concerns me, worries me, is the outside-in approach. We have not yet found the cadence to getting enough consumer information, consumer behavior information. We don't have the apparatus to get this information. I know there are emerging competitors, for example, in China, because they are far more advanced in connected vehicles. Every time a bike goes over a bump, it is recorded and transmitted to their R&D center. And the next suspension system will be designed by the millions of bits and bytes which they have received, and saying that this is actual factual method with which to design the suspension system. We will do it on the basis of experience, and that is too slow. How do you get that information flow and getting then the people to imaginatively use this information is another big challenge, I feel. And it is, like I said, preoccupying me, because I don't think that digital is an issue of technology. One can get the technology.
No, allow me to comment on that.
The issue is about a
When you say
culture.
Allow me to comment on that. When you're saying that you're not able to get that data of whenever the bike perhaps hits a bump, you're not getting that data, and that data would help Bajaj to, make better bikes. What is stopping Bajaj to get that data?
Yeah, so we have to put in those kind of bikes. We have to put in those information and collection systems. We have to clean up that data. We must make sure that it is not corrupted. And that is just the first step. The second step is to have somebody sitting out here who is very curious and who thinks that if he has this data, can use this data to do something. That, I think, is another big challenge. And we want to move very fast in this area, because we feel that going forward, this is going to be a big game changer for us.
Right. Well, we spoke about a lot of issues, including globalization, how to ensure that your supply chains are more flexible, how to reskill your workforce in digital era. Arindam, a lot of questions are coming for you and asking on what the future of Indian MSMEs are going to be. The government, of course, is hoping that MSMEs contribute a much larger share. There is a lot of focus on MSMEs as well. The government, even during COVID times, has been trying to provide a lot of liquidity to small and medium enterprises as well. And, yet we're seeing that small and medium enterprises have been really struggling during this COVID period as well. So what is your, view going to be in terms of how to ensure that they not just survive, but thrive as well?
That's, I think, a $1 trillion question, as Sunil Mathur said. I mean, if we need to create, such a large manufacturing part of our economy, plus also what Amitabh Khan said, if we want to be part of global supply chains, we need to have, highly productive industrial sector, and a large part of industrial sectors will always be MSMEs. And that has been a challenge. There has been challenge from multiple dimensions, which has been further compounded by the fact that today all industrial companies are going through this step change of capabilities because of digital. Now, this is both a challenge and an opportunity, because till now, in the normal kind of a business architecture, we have not been as competitive as we can be. In the new digital supply chains that are emerging, we have an opportunity if we can put in. But to my mind, what Rakesh was saying, digital transformation and digitization and building the capabilities to be able to compete with other emerging market companies and be part of global supply chains. The challenge is less about technology, the challenge is about the mindset and people. And I think that one of the biggest things that we need to figure out in India, and I don't have an answer to this, but at least I know that there's a question: how do we create a mindset where our industry leaders, be it large companies or small companies, truly aspire to be in terms of productivity at the top quartile productivity? And that to me is the first thing. It's a question of people. It's a question of starting the aspirations. It's a question of putting in the right kind of tools, techniques, training. But it starts with having that aspiration and the drive to be wanting to be at the cutting edge of productivity. And if you don't do that, and I'm sorry to say that till now our MSMEs have not been able to achieve that in a physical world, and we have created a challenge in the digital world that we are facing today. So I would not be negative, but I would be cognizant of the fact that the government is putting in a huge amount of effort. But I also think that large companies like Bajaj Auto and Siemens are also working directly and indirectly in helping their suppliers and tier 2 suppliers, tier 3 suppliers actually gain these kind of competences to be able to compete in their supply chains.
Mr. Mathur, if you can come in on that, a lot of questions are coming in for small and medium enterprises. And while bigger companies need to look at moving, from being great to moving beyond that, for small and medium enterprises, the challenges are very, very different. They have to look at issues on a day-to-day basis. What is your advice going to be for them?
So I think, Ruchi, it's if I look at the experience out of Germany, Germany has got 95%, has got almost 3.5 million small and medium enterprise called the Mittelstand. Yeah, they contribute to nearly 99% in businesses and about 60% in employment there. Almost 95% of them are family owned. 54% of them have launched an innovation in the last 3 years. There are 2,500 global champions, small and medium enterprises that are global champions in a niche product. They employ about 83% of training. So that business model is using apprentices all the time. They have been called the hidden champions of Germany. And I believe we can learn out of that experience there to see what we can do here. The Germans have developed an ecosystem around it. They've acknowledged, for example, that innovation is the key for a small and medium enterprise. But a small and medium enterprise doesn't have the funds for it.
Right.
They've created partnerships with some of the top research institutes around the country. They've created banking systems which are localized to the small and medium enterprises. So the banks know the owners of all small and medium enterprises there. The business model runs around apprenticeship training there. Right. So I think these are some things. 70% of them use an equity capital of more than 70% of their own. right? As compared to something which is exactly the opposite here in the country. So I think there are a lot of lessons that can be done. Companies like ours, and I'm sure Bajaj as well, and many others are definitely engaging with the large number of small and medium enterprises. We are able to pass on technology onto them. We're able to support them with financing solutions. We've opened a non-banking finance company, for example,
Right.
in the country where we are able to help them with that. But those are short-term solutions. I think what we really need is for the small and medium enterprises to be a little bit bolder. I do not think that getting capital is the biggest issue. Again, without sounding repetitive here, digitalization in a small and medium enterprise can save a huge amount of money.
Right.
It can save capex, it can save capital, it can save costs.
Right. Let me get Mr. Sharma in on that. Mr. Sharma, there are questions coming in for you as well. Talk to us about how, what is it basically that MSMEs need to do? As Mr. Mathur was pointing out, it's not about capital. You need to think out of the box, look at digitization, embrace digitization as well in a big way. And there are also questions coming in for you, seeking your views on data privacy and how Indians should approach that issue locally as well as globally.
That's quite a spectrum. But on the medium and small enterprises, my own experience, particularly in the last 6 months, has been that they've responded marvelously. The kind of agility which the MSMEs have demonstrated, in fact, validates the kind of model which the auto industry has, which has got a deep supply chain, a three-tiered structure in the supply chain. And there was so much of disruption globally and locally, but the agility which the smaller companies brought into play was fantastic. The one thing over the years which I've noticed, which both large organizations and the small enterprises are a bit guilty of underinvesting in, is building a joint perspective. A lot of time we do things because there is a certain reason, there is a strategic imperative or an opportunity. But when we communicate the outcome of that into what is required of an MSME, and this could be a front-end MSME of a dealership, a person having many dealerships, a distributor, or a vendor, it gets sort of processed and parceled out as a set of actions and requirements. And I have also not seen a hunger from the other side of wanting to understand we're all locked in very, very closely, rather more closely than one can imagine. Our fates are tied. And I just wonder why we don't invest enough in sharing perspectives, in building the big picture and not just socializing the picture, but institutionalizing the picture, that this is the picture we all believe. This is the movie we are all making together. I think there is, I would say, yes, we'll probably be guilty of that. It'd be very important to make this whole partnership more effective. What was the second one, Ruchi?
I asked you about your views on the issue of data privacy.
Well, frankly, I'm really not the best person to talk. I'm very happy for our organization to be a follower in this. We are saying that let's just look at what the big gorillas are doing over here and just...
Okay, all right. On that note, we're running out of time. Arindam, if you would like to sum up the panel discussion that we had today. And then Renuka, of course, over to you.
Now, first, I'd like to thank panelists here, Sunil, Rakesh, Rama, and I think Amitabh had to leave because he must have had some official work.
He had a meeting with the finance secretary, so he had to leave.
The budget time is round the corner.
Yeah, in absentia, Amitabh as well, to thank you for coming, sharing your thoughts, experiences. And Siemens and Bajaj are important, what I call stories in the book. And Rama has been both a friend, philosopher, a guide, and a thought partner in many of the ideas. So she can be accused of being partner in the crime. But thank you very much. When I step back and think about the world we are in today, it's, to me, as Mark Visser said, and I quoted it right at the start of the presentation, we are in a torn world, which contradictions, but it offers challenges, but it also offers enormous opportunities. Enormous opportunities as an Indian company. And we've seen this opportunities, Bajaj Auto not shying away, saying that, look, this is the world. We have to just adapt, but we have enormous opportunity to do. Same from a global perspective, Siemens are doing that. So from that perspective, I think one of the things that came out very clearly for me is we need to change, we need to adapt, but this world is still one of huge opportunity. And if you are kind of building this kind of flexible, adaptive, resilient business model, and with a deep kind of consumer insight and connections that Rama was able to bring out, I think, that to me is today the kind of a winning recipe and core to the playbook that the book makes out a case for. So that's what I will say is that in some sense, a reflection of some of the stories. And I really once again thank all the panelists and you, Ruchi, for doing such a fabulous job of getting all of us to talk and share our own stories.
Okay, with that, we come to a close of this session. Thank you to all the panelists, Mr. Bijapurkar, Mr. Sharma, Mr. Mathur, and of course, the man of the moment, Arindam Bhattacharya. And I'd also like to thank Aditi and Bhumika for working so closely and putting this up together. Thank you, Ruchi, for agreeing to do this. And
Thank you.
we really appreciate it. And thank you, Arindam, for giving CII this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Nice.
Thank you,
meeting
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.